Hi, this is Al Stewart, and I'm going to be playing on Long Island at the Bolton Center on July the 22nd, and we would love to see you there. You're listening to the Dave's Gone By radio show, and I'm talking to Sol Solomon, the rabbi.
Oh, shalom, my friends. Shalom. This is your old pal, Rabbi Sol Solomon, and I am delighted because you know I have a musical spirit. I love all things creative and cultural and musical. Well, we have on the phone with us today in the neighborhood someone who has been making music since the late 1960s. You know who he is. You've heard him on the radio in the 1970s with The Year of the Cat and Time Passages, but he has so much more music than that. And if you want to hear so much more music from Al Stewart, you can go see him Sunday evening, July 22nd, at the YMCA Bolton Center on Long Island. Al Stewart in the neighborhood with us. Shalom to you, Al.
Hey, how are you doing?
Thank God, I've got the usual aches and pains, but I manage. How are you doing?
I think the same thing as you, the usual aches and pains, but we try to manage.
Well, does it get harder to tour and to schlep around the country and the world, actually, when you're a bit older? You're not 20, you're not 30 anymore.
No, it's been a long time. Yeah, I guess it does, but, everything gets harder no matter what profession you're in. It doesn't really make any difference, And this is as good a job to have as any that I can think of.
Now, when you're performing at the Bolton Center, you're going to be backed by, are you solo with guitars or a band? What will people see?
They will see a guitar player. It's interesting. I work in a lot of different ways. I can be solo, I can work with another guitar player, I can work with a percussionist, or I can work with a band, But I think that on this occasion I'm going to have one other guitar player with me.
Oh, very nice. Is it going to be a local person that you'll get from New York?
No, it's a guy from Chicago. I've been touring with a band called the Empty Pockets, and the guitar player in the Empty Pockets is a guy called Josh Solomon.
Ha!
And,
any relation to me?
I probably so.
Very distantly, perhaps, but okay, very nice. So, here's a question, and you probably get this all the time. You had big radio hits in the 70s, mainly with two songs. You had, of course, The Year of the Cat and Time Passages, but you've written so much else. Do you get tired of having to play one or both of those two pretty much whenever you do what you do?
No, I don't think I do. I mean, people want to hear them, so I'm perfectly happy to play them. I mean, if you get to play about 15 songs in an evening, and that's just two of them, so I get to change, all the other ones around, and I do different songs at different shows, and so it all works out really. And like I said, I do different shows if I play with a band or if I play acoustically. That changes it also. From night to night, it's pretty much different all the time.
So what are a couple of the other songs that, you don't have to give them all away, but a couple of songs people might be able to expect to hear from you on...
No, I've no idea. I mean, I make the set list up about 10 minutes before I go on stage. I never give it any thought until the last moment.
Really?
It's totally spontaneous. It'll be whatever we feel like playing, Look at the audience and see if they look awake and interested, and you act accordingly, If it's a buzzy crowd and it's like a loud room, then you tend to play more up-tempo things, and if it's like comfortable and people are leaning back and relaxing, then you can play maybe some slower things, But I never really make my mind up what I'm going to do until the last moment. And even then, I take the list on stage and sometimes change it, so it's all spontaneous.
And Josh Solomon is able to follow along because you've basically rehearsed and he knows a whole bunch of your songs that he can immediately dip into from memory.
Well, we've just done about 60 shows together with the band, with his band, The Empty Pockets. As he's been playing all of these things, he certainly knows them by now.
Let's roll it back. Because you were, I think, born in Scotland, but then moved to London, and now you're in California. How did it take shape, your musical career and life?
I was born at a great time, really. There was a guy called Lonnie Donegan, and I can never understand why Americans don't know him, but they don't.
Well, they know the chewing gum. Does your chewing gum lose its flavor on the big poster?
Yeah. Which is a silly thing to know him for, because he mostly did Lead Belly songs and Woody Guthrie and things like that. But Lonnie basically basically invented this thing called skiffle, which was folk music played really, really fast. And in 1957, it was the dominant thing in the charts in England. Lonnie Donegan was the biggest star in England at the time. And he did something, well, I mean, Paul McCartney wouldn't have met John Lennon if it wasn't for Lonnie Donegan, because John Lennon was in a skiffle group trying to be Lonnie Donegan. And he did something absolutely remarkable, which was that the sale of guitars in England in 1956, I think, had been about 5,000. By the end of 1957, the sale of guitars in England was 250,000, and all the kids who bought guitars, and I was one of them, and buckled down and started playing, formed what would then, a bunch of years later, become the British Invasion, because all of these people joined bands. And if you're doing a historically minded survey of this period in pop music, you could probably make a good argument that Lonnie Donegan is the reason that all those bands existed, the Beatles included. So that's where I started. I started listening to Lonnie Donegan, as did everyone else in England.
You also discovered that you had a facility with guitar and a facility with voice and singing, too. Do you remember the first song of your own that you ever wrote?
Yeah, it was called So I Kept Walking. And it was sort of a spiritual, I think. I mean, Lonnie used to sing spirituals as well. So I kept walking all down the road. It wasn't really very good, but I do remember I wrote that.
And you were roughly how oldish?
13, 14.
Oh, yeah, okay. So how good do you expect it to be back then? But was it a skiffle-type gospel-y number?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it was, yeah.
So at what point did it go from being kind of a hobby, because every kid wanted to be Lonnie Donegan and pick up a guitar and maybe play at the high school dance, versus something more professional-ish?
I discovered that, I could do words. I mean, I just could rhyme anything. I mean, I've always been able to do that. I only have two talents. I can read a wine list and I can rhyme things, and that's it. Amazingly enough, those are the only two talents that you actually need to tour. So, I just started writing poems, and I think I probably wrote close to 100 poems, when I was 14 and 15. And it occurred to me at some point that I could set these things to music, so some of them turned into songs. And then I got really lucky again, because this period the Beatles broke through, and so I joined a band when I left school, and we played Twist and Shout 3 times a night and all that kind of thing. Even more fortunately, Bob Dylan came along, because I was in this band, but I wasn't very good. My voice wasn't loud enough. I couldn't play guitar well enough, and I was really, seriously, after about 2 years of schlepping around, as you say, playing in dance halls and places like that, I was thinking, this isn't happening. I'm not cut out to be a pop star. And amazingly, Bob Dylan kind of arrived on the scene, and I took one look at him, standing on stage playing an acoustic guitar and, basically being a singing dictionary, and I thought, I can do that.
Now, did you ever see him actually perform live back in the day? Did you go see him in concert?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, totally. I went to the Albert Hall.
Of course.
Got lucky again. I ran into Tom Wilson, who was his producer at the time, so talked to him. And then I hit the jackpot, really, I guess you could say, because I'd come up to London, it was early 65, and I'd learned a whole pile of Bob Dylan songs. And I got hired by a folk club in the West End of London, actually 2 eventually, and so I had a regular gig. There I am, living in the East End of London, and who should move into the room next to me but Paul Simon?
Well, I thought you were rooming together. Didn't you share an apartment, or you were next door?
No, we shared an apartment. I mean, there were other people there as well. So in quick succession, the Beatles happened. I started learning Bob Dylan songs. I got hired by folk clubs, and then Paul Simon started writing songs in the room next to me, and I was listening to him through the wall, and I thought, oh, that's how you do it. By the end of 1965, I'd given up trying to be in a band, and I'd become a folk singer. But it was like dominoes falling into place, really. Every day you'd go out and something else amazing would happen. Bert Chance was just extraordinary. Just such a huge influence on everyone in England. And I saw him right at the beginning of his career, and it kind of changed my mind about what music was really all about. Wonderful times, I think.
Well, let me ask you, I'm not going to leave the Paul Simon thing so quickly. Did you ever collaborate with him? Did he ever help you with a song? You help him?
No, I basically was the idiot who carried the guitar cases. Paul was had a long conversation about Bob Dylan's Desolation Row, which had just been released. It was an 11-minute song. And I'd shut myself up in a room for 24 hours and memorized it because I wanted to be the first person in England to play it. And I think I was. I went out on the day the record was released and played it in 2 different clubs. And Paul listened to me trying to learn Desolation Row, and all he said were 2 words. He said, rehashed Ferlinghetti. Now, at the time, of course, I didn't know about Lawrence Ferlinghetti and the San Francisco Poets. And I thought he was talking about Italian food. I had no idea what he was So I was kind of wet behind the ears, and I was 19, and I was just trying to learn Desolation Row.
Oh, my goodness. Now, Paul Simon, you make him sound like kind of, I won't say mean, but a bit of a snarky fellow at the... I mean, he had to be. That was his thing. You fight when you're young, and then you piss on everything that's come before you, because that's the only way you can rise up. But do you have any fun, nice anecdotes about him?
No. I mean, we were hanging around for about... Artie Garfunkel was there too, but he'd quit the music business, and I think he was trying to be a mathematician. But I do remember sitting in Trafalgar Square with Paul and Art, and Paul decided he wanted to hear Sounds of Silence in 3-part harmony, so he told me to sing this part. So we're singing it, and it sounded pretty good. And then a policeman comes along and points at us, and I think obviously he thinks we're a bunch of hippies, and he says, "You can't do that here. You've got to move along." And Paul, not knowing anything about English policemen, decides to take issue with this, and he says, "Well, I mean, it's a free country, and I'm just playing the guitar, and I don't want to move along." And the policeman, who's about 9 feet tall, is towering over Paul, and he's saying, "You're going to move along now, sir, or I'm going to remove that instrument." And I just said to Paul, this is an English policeman. It's Trafalgar Square. It's London. Let's just move along. So I think I saved him getting hit over the head with a guitar on that occasion.
Or having the guitar inserted in a place that guitar shouldn't really go. I know. Oh, my God. Now, that's a cool story. Speaking of difficult people, though, that folk club that you were in, is that also the place where Van Morrison used to play?
Yep. Van Morrison had a residency. The club was called Les Cousins in French, but everybody in England called it Les Cousins because a lot of them couldn't speak French. And Van Morrison had, for a while, the Wednesday slot, so that meant he was there every Wednesday evening. And it was, it was really early on. Of course, it was before Astral Weeks, and no one had heard of him apart from the fact that he'd been in them. And he would play, but very few people actually bothered to go down and see him, which is quite extraordinary considering, what happened next in his career.
Well, was he pleasant? Did you get on with him?
I never talked to him. I went down a couple of times and watched him play a couple of songs, but for some reason, I don't know why, I never actually got to talk to Van Morrison. I did know Cat Stevens very well before he became Cat Stevens. He was calling himself Steve Adams back in those days.
Did you ever collaborate with him or try and write a song together?
Well, by that time I was the compere at Les Cousins, and so it was my job to put people on stage and take them off. And Steve knew, he knew 2 songs, and so he would turn up every week, and I'd put him on stage, and he'd sing his 2 songs and come off again. And it was very funny. I mean, one day he came in and he had, you remember 45s, the little singles, records?
Yeah.
Of course you do.
Of course, yeah.
So one day he comes in, he's got a paper bag with a single in it. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, I've made a record." And I said, "Well, you can't have made a record. You only do 2 songs."
Well, you have an A-side and a B-side. There you go.
Why, who would sign you and let you make a record? And he said, "Well, Decca did." And Decca was a major label, and, that was, wow, you made a record on Decca, a real live record? I said, "Show it to me." He said, "I can't." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, they changed my name, and I'm embarrassed to show it to you." It took me an hour to make him show me this single. And when he did show it to me, the song was called "I Love My Dog." And of course, because of that, they changed his name to Cat Stevens, and he was really embarrassed about it.
Oh, that's what. Now, when you were not emceeing, you were the compere, as you said, at Les Cousins. Were there any folk singers, people who got up there that you thought would be really big and the next big thing, but it never happened for them?
Oh, yeah.
Like who?
Absolutely. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. I can't. There was one guy who was the class of the English folk scene. He was just better than everyone else. And in 1966, he just mysteriously disappeared. I never saw him again. So consequently, he never even made a record. I've actually forgotten his name at this point. But there were people who you felt were really good, and they were definitely going to be successful. When Fairport Convention started out, I mean, I loved Richard Thompson's guitar playing, and I loved Sandy Dennis singing, and it seemed obvious that they were going to do really, really well. And of course they did. I mean, Richard is still at it. He's still doing well.
Oh, he's genius.
And then people like Roy Harper and Ralph McTell and Still I Span and the incredible string band I thought were going to be the folk Beatles. I thought they were so good. Their second and third albums were huge in England. But they got into, I don't know, some weird kind of cult. And they didn't become as commercially successful as I thought. So I was, and there was a band out of Ireland called Chen and Nog, and I thought they were going to be huge, but that didn't happen either. So I did get some of it wrong. Conversely, there was a street singer, a busker. Buskers play to cinema queues in the West End of London, and this guy, he couldn't even get a gig at a folk club. I mean, he would just play on the street at the queues and pass the hat around. And his name was Don Partridge. And I think I spent one evening about 3 hours in a restaurant with Don, and he was telling me how he'd got this master plan that he was going to make a record and it was going to be a hit. And I just listened to this in disbelief because, you sing on the streets and pass the hat. How are you going to make a record and how's it going to be a hit? But he did it, unbelievably. It was called Rosie, and it went into the English top 10. And I thought, wow. I mean, I'm picking all these people to be stars, and none of them are making it. And then Don Partridge makes this record, and it goes in the top 10. And I decided at that point that I just couldn't pick them. I mean, I just had no ability to do it.
Now, speaking of folks that you played with or played on records with, you were in sessions with one of the more tragic figures of the folk scene, Jackson C. Frank. Do you remember anything about him and playing with him and being around him?
Well, Jackson it made a wonderful album. It was actually produced by Paul Simon. When I was living there in the house and with Paul and Art, Jackson used to come around all the time, and he would play his songs, and Paul loved them. And so one day we all bundled into the studio, and that was the first record I ever played on. Paul said, "Go out and play the guitar on this song." And so I went out and I played a part, and it seemed to go well, and Paul liked it, so he kept it. So that album came out, sold 1,200 copies, and then Jackson went back to America, and that should have been the end of it, but of course it wasn't, because Jackson has turned into this like Nick Drake figure, whereby he died a long time ago, but each year that goes by, he seems to become better known. He's gone. Basically now he's sort of a legendary figure, I think.
Yeah. Actually, I won't say unfortunately, it wasn't that long ago that he died, but he lived a while. He recorded a bit more, but he just had such an awful life.
No, he had an awful life. I mean, absolutely awful. And it began early, too. I mean, he was burnt in a fire at his school, and I think that really affected him.
Now, also, we talk about you're a pretty good guitar player, absolutely. Richard Thompson is a great guitar player. There's another great guitar player who has played you on your albums, on your work, a fellow named Jimmy Page.
Yeah, well, he's on a few tracks, yeah.
Any memories?
It's a funny story, really. I mean, I met him when I was making my first single. Jimmy was on the session, and what I really remember was that he'd been in a band called Neil Christian and the Crusaders, and nobody knew that, but I knew that. And so I started talking to him about Neil Christian and the Crusaders, and he was just thrilled that I knew about this band. And I said, well, what are your plans now? Because he was just being a session musician at the time. And he said, well, I'm thinking of forming a band. And we've been getting on really well. And he sort of looked at me meaningfully and said, we need a bass player. And what I should have said is, how hard can it be to play the bass? But I didn't say that at all. What I actually said was, "Oh, good luck with that." And of course, the band that he formed was Led Zeppelin.
So you could have been John Paul Jones.
I said, "Oh, I can play the bass."
Yeah.
I might have had a completely different life.
Well, let me ask. I mean, you didn't go towards hard, heavy rock. You started in sort of an orchestral, folky way into some level of hippie-ish stuff, and then morphed back into folk and historical stuff. Do you kind of wish at some point you really pounded into more hard rock or not?
Well, you see, I'd come from rock and roll. I mean, I got into folk because of Bob Dylan, because I went up and I got this job singing in Bunge's Coffee Bar and Les Cousins, and it sort of crept up on me, and then all of a sudden I was a folk singer. But you got to remember, for the 2 years before that, I was playing rock and roll songs all night. I mean, I wasn't singing. I didn't have the voice for it, but I was playing lead guitar in a rock band. So there's part of me that remembers how to do that. It's just that I can't sing it, because if I could sing like Roger Daltrey, I would have joined The Who, you know what I mean? But I became a folk singer because I just couldn't be heard over the band,
That's totally fair. And, they have the Glastonbury Festival, which continues to this day. It's you were at the very, very first one. Do you remember any memories of that, what that was like?
Well, it was in a field. It was 1,000 people. It was £1 to get in, which is $1.30. And, it was just basically people sitting in a field listening to music. I mean, we had absolutely no idea that it would become a big thing. My main memory was that was the day that Jimi Hendrix died. So it cast a pall over the whole proceedings. We were all sitting in the field, and we got the news that Jimi Hendrix had died, and so it was, oh dear, you know what I mean?
Well,
it was a downer, to say the least.
And they invited you back, I think in 1995 for the 25th anniversary. Was it suddenly a whole different experience?
Oh, yeah. I mean, by then it was big. They also invited me back for the 40th anniversary, and by then it was monstrous, And if I continue to live, I mean, they'll probably have me back for the 50th. I think they're running out of people who were actually at the first one.
Well, 2020 will be the 50 years, It was 1970 originally, so if you, God willing, you live another 2 years, you can go. It'll be...
That's true. Hopefully they'll remember,
Well, I'm sure they'll remember.
Glastonbury, I mean, it was fun. The last time I played it, it was really fun. It went really well. And that would have been in, 2010, because it was the 40th anniversary. Yeah.
Right. So, let me ask also, I mean, you had a good career going. You had several albums out. They were in folky tradition. And then stardom. And then you're on the radio, not just locally in England or Scotland, but, in America too. Did that really, really upend and change your life when Year of the Cat came out?
I don't know. It was a strange time. I was unaware of a lot of it because I was on the road. The record company had told us to come out for a 6-week tour to promote it. And the tour kept getting extended because that record, it went up the charts really slowly. It was like a few places every week, and the tour that was supposed to be 6 weeks took 7 months because that's how long it took for the record to go up and then down again. And because I was on the road and because I was we did something like 100 shows, I think, on that tour. It was just a matter of waking up every morning, getting in the van, going to the next gig, getting on stage, playing, and then falling asleep. So, I wasn't, had I been, in Los Angeles or New York or somewhere where it mattered, probably I would have been aware that I had a hit record and this was all good fun, and people might have been inviting me to parties and patting me on the back or on the head or whatever they do. But I wasn't. I was in Kentucky and I was in Ohio and I was sitting in the back of a van for this entire time. So by the time I got back in April of 1977, the record had fallen out of the charts and everyone ignored me. So I missed out on what you might call fame. I mean, I never had it. I was just there on the road.
Well, but when that album and then Time Passages followed, was it up the point where you looked, perhaps, I don't know if this is true, the way record companies operate, but you can say, hey, you know what, I never really have to work again? Or did record companies do what they do, like mercury poisoning to Graham Parker, and you were like, I've got to play all the rest of my life.
Well, I want to play all the rest of my life. I mean, I never had any thoughts of, retiring. Obviously, here I am at 72, still doing the same thing.
But you want to.
I didn't have any. Yeah. I'll tell you what it is. If you look at the 4 albums that sold the most, there would be Past, Present, and Future, Modern Times, You're the Cat, and Time Passages. And my face doesn't appear on the front cover of any of those records in America. And as a result, even when maybe by the time of Time Passages, the thing's in the top 10. I remember walking down Sunset Strip to Tower Records, which is the epicenter of the music business, and I probably did that every day because I lived in the area, and I never once got recognized, ever. The reason being, of course, that my face was never on the front page, on the front cover of any of the albums, so nobody knew what I looked like. So I managed to almost completely avoid any sort of sense of stardom, which I think is great, because I've seen a lot of my colleagues go through this rather rough period because they think they're stars, and all of a sudden they're not, and then they can't deal with it, and that's it can be quite a difficult thing to navigate. But I literally never went through that. I mean, I never felt, oh, you're a star, because no one ever knew, no one ever knew who I was, and there were even occasions when I would turn up for my own gigs and they wouldn't let me in. So I never really had that, and actually I'm very grateful because you live a more or less normal life if you can avoid it.
Now, you chose to move to and have stayed in California as opposed to staying in the UK, in London, or going back to Scotland. Was it the weather, or just being near the music industry? Why?
Oh, no, I never had anything to do with the music industry. I got very tied up in the wine industry. That's why I'm in California. Pretty much all the people that I hung out with were in the wine business. I spent a lot of them. I spent most of the 80s actually studying wine. I didn't really play very much in the 80s. And eventually ended up I'm actually a master counselor of French wine.
Whoa. Do you have a label?
Which means I can recommend things and do that. And I came really, really close to starting a vineyard, and then I probably would have just been in the wine business, but at the last moment, for reasons that are too complicated to go into, I didn't do that, and then I drifted back into music again. But pretty much all the socializing I did was with people who were around the wine scene.
Well, let me ask, not that we want to give burglars any ideas, but what is like the best, most expensive, fabulous wine you've got tucked somewhere in your cellar?
It doesn't really work like that. I mean, there are very expensive wines in the world, none of which I now own, but I've had all of them, obviously, in my lifetime. But what we've done, we've reached a point now in the wine business where it's really strange because there are a lot of fakes floating around. I mean, I hate to say this to to your listeners, if you have any of them that are dead keen to go and buy a 47 Petrus or something, which would be a fabulous wine. But what happened was that when the wine trade moved into China, and the Chinese were buying everything that wasn't nailed down, some bright sparks discovered that the Chinese had absolutely no idea what these bottles looked like. They just knew, they'd read about them and they wanted them. And so, all these fakes got shipped over to China, and then a lot of them started coming back again. It's said, and this is I'm sure it's not true, but it gives you some idea. It is said that more 1982 Chateau Petrus is sold in Las Vegas every year than was actually made.
Well, did you ever see that? There's an episode of a TV show called American Greed.
Yes. It's that one I think was about. Was it about John Fox or was it about Rudy Curry-Alwyn? But there are a bunch of people who've been exposed, doing this stuff and doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And so it's a tricky time. I mean, the people who bought wine 30 years ago when there weren't really any or at least many fakes around and have these things stashed away in their cellars probably have the real stuff. But would I go out now and spend $5,000 on an old Bordeaux? I mean, absolutely not, because I have no idea what I'd be getting. I just think things have changed. The times have changed.
Well, speaking of expense...
Really expensive wines are now so expensive that the only people who buy them are like sort of, Russian oligarchs that, you know.
Now, but the sad part is, speaking of expense, you were interviewed somewhere and said it's not worth it for you to put out a new album or to make new music. It's worth it for you to tour, but because it'll cost $75,000 to put out an album, and how many people? You don't think that would be cost effective? There wouldn't be, if you sold it on your tours, there wouldn't be, like, let's say, 10,000 people who'd spend $10-20 on it, and you break even.
I've never made a record that sold less than 10,000 copies, and I don't want to start now. I mean, what happened? It takes you about a year to write it, record it, do the artwork, and everything else. What if it sells 943 copies? I mean, is it really worth going into doing that? I mean,
well, it's part of your legacy, though. It's part of your, you put it out there. God willing, thank God you can afford to do so, even if it's a loss. And there it is. These are songs that you want at least people who really want to hear it to hear.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument for doing that. I'm thinking about it. But you don't want to do a vanity project. There are a lot of those floating around. I mean, people who think, I've written great songs. In the old days, the record company acted as a sort of a monitor. And if I think, this is a great song, and I trundle down to the record company and say, listen to this, and they say, actually, we think that's awful, then you would go home again and you would rethink what you were doing. You'd probably rewrite the song or move on to something else, But
well, then you hire a producer and someone who maybe isn't a friend.
A producer would be good too. But a lot of musicians have home studios and they make albums, and there's no one to tell them, if this is good or if this is bad. And some of them are really not very good, and I don't want to be in the position where I'm not being monitored. I don't want to put out something that maybe I think is good, but maybe it isn't.
Do you miss then the days of the big label?
Well, the days of the big label were. It was a comfortable existence. Now, the big label would take, they would pay you peanuts and they would take the lion's share of the money. But at the same time, they would look after everything. They'd give you an advance so you could go on tour, and, they'd make videos for you and whatever big labels do. So it was a comfortable existence, but it's very hard for me to explain my relationship to records. Essentially, I never liked making them. What I like doing is playing live. And I made records because I had to, because you can't be in this business and not do it. But I would have been perfectly happy never putting my foot in a recording studio, because it's an antiseptic kind of a feeling. I don't get anything back. I need an audience in front of me to get something back.
But
in the case of some people that I know, Alan Parsons is a perfect example. They live to be in the studio. They love being in the studio, and just twiddling knobs and doing all this stuff is a thrill. And whenever I've set foot in a recording studio, I can't wait to get out again. I mean, okay, I've sung this once. Can I go home now? I just don't like them. It's like going to the dentist for me. So that's another reason not to make another record, because at the moment I don't have to.
Well, when you are playing in places like the Bolton Theater on July 22nd and people come see you, do you do what so many artists do, come out after the show and take some of your older CDs and stuff and sign them and things, and people can buy those?
I do sometimes. Can't guarantee if I will or I won't. I used to do this every single night, and for about 10 years I did exactly that. And then what happened was I started playing with the band, and it takes a lot more energy to play with the band. Also, we were drawing a lot more people. Now, if you have 200, if you've got 50 people waiting after the show, that's one thing. But sometimes, when we were doing band shows, I would come out and there'd be like 200 people standing in a row. So that means you've got another hour and a half or 2 hours of signing after an hour and a half or 2 hours of playing. And that just got to be too much. I mean, I couldn't keep up with it. So, I might peek my nose around the corner and see how many people are waiting at the Bolton. And if it's a small crowd, I'll come out. But
that's fair.
Population of Long Island is waiting for me, then I probably will hide in the dressing room.
Well, either way, people should go see you at the Bolton Center on July 22nd, Sunday. And to find out more, by the way, about your life and your career and your music and where you'll be touring elsewhere, everybody please also can go to Al Stewart alstewart.com, ALSTEWART, alstewart.com. A few more questions for you if you have the time with us, and this has just been so delightful. But and you certainly talked about being I'm probably mispronouncing this, an oenophile. Is that
oenophile? Yeah.
But, you were in rock and roll, you're in folk, you're in the music business. How did you avoid, especially the years that you came up, getting too addicted to things like alcohol or, the hippie culture of drugs and other pharmaceuticals, shall we say, hallucinogens? Were you able to steer clear of all of that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think I just came from a completely different background than many people in the music business. I was very middle class. I went to a private boarding school, and we just didn't do drugs. I mean, fine French wine was what my friends were into. So, I would drink, like a great bottle of Bordeaux, but I had no interest whatsoever in grubbing around and doing nasty drugs in dark, nasty places. I mean, it didn't appeal to me. I did try to smoke a joint on, I think, 2 occasions when I was much younger, and both times it made me sick, so I thought, well, that's it. This is just not for me. As you say, well, hey, right now I'm just finishing, actually, a book on punk rock. It's absolutely brilliant. It's great. It's called Please Kill Me, and it's the uncensored oral history of punk. And so many people in this book are dying all the time. And they're dying by doing exactly what you're talking about. I mean, I've just read a whole thing on Johnny Thunders, and look, it would have been great to have been in the New York Dolls, but I certainly wouldn't have wanted his life, I didn't, I never wanted that,
Now, as a wine person...
I'm more the sort of person who wants to be sitting in a comfortable chair with a bottle of claret in front of me,
But be honest, as a wine person... What are your thoughts on Manischewitz?
Well, I think it's more of a cultural thing than an expression of vernacular art, put it that way.
Oh, vernacular art from Vienna. Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, but what's so different from a $10 bottle of Manischewitz to, as you say, a $5,000 bottle? But it's just the sweetness.
Yes, for a start, the sugar content in Manischewitz is enough to kill a horse. I mean, there are certain things at which you should draw the line, and that's one.
Do you feel similarly about Kedem?
About what?
Kedem? Or you've never heard of Kedem?
I have never heard of Kedem. It sounds like it should be in the beer world, but I don't know anything about it.
No, it's Kedem. It's like a slightly higher level than Manischewitz, but it's still glorified Manischewitz. I'm just kind of...
Can we move up the scale a little more?
I'm not sure. Okay, well, Lafitte Rothschild, 1960-something, I don't know.
Yeah, no, you don't know. Because 1967 was not a particularly good year in the Médoc, and that's where Lafitte is from the commune of Pauillac. And the 67 Lafitte actually wasn't terribly nice, but it would still cost you a lot of money. But no, if you were to say a 59 Lafitte, then I would be with you. That's one of the greatest ones I've ever had.
All right. Okay, fine. It's still a Jewish label wine. I'm still proud of that much.
Well, look, I mean, Lafitte is owned by the Rothschild family, which is a Jewish family. They also own a different branch of the same family, also own Mouton Rothschild. So, Lafitte is very much a Jewish wine, as is Mouton Rothschild.
I'm happy to hear that. Can I ask you how much part does any religion play in your life as a grown-up? Now, I know you're not Jewish, but are you spiritual? Do you believe in God? Do you practice anything? Where are you at?
I think I'm probably the least spiritual person that I've ever met. I really am not spiritual. I think because I grew up at the time of the hippie culture, and I was never a part of it. I mean, I didn't smoke dope. I mean, I couldn't be a part of it. I didn't hang out with musicians, and I didn't. I just was divorced from that whole thing. But I mean, on occasions you'd run into them, and it's people would say things like, "Oh man, it's so beautiful, so wonderful," and it didn't look beautiful or wonderful to me. It just looked like it was raining, and probably it was time to go home. And I don't know. I'm just not spiritual. I mean, my interest when I go to a town is not to, sort of go and look at the rainbows or the fields or the trees. I'm probably looking for a sushi bar. You know what I mean? I'm very practical, for better or for worse.
But in terms of what keeps you going and what makes you happy, I'm like when you did your second album, I read somewhere that you were depressed, and a lot of that Love Chronicles album might feel a little down. How do you pull yourself out of that?
Well, that was a long time ago. I mean, I had a bad love affair, and actually Love Chronicles was the good bit. That was before it went wrong. But how do you pull yourself out on a daily basis? I mean, I like it. I'm a musician because that's what I do for a living. But music is one part of what I like, and it's not the greater part. I'm equally interested in wine, obviously, and history, obviously, in literature, in film. All of these things are very pleasing, and I try to balance my life so that they're all equal parts of my life. I mean, I don't really sit around and listen to music all the time, although I do like it. I'm likely to be just as likely to be reading a history book or watching a movie or reading a novel or any of these things. Music is just like one part of what I'm interested in. It happens to be the part that makes a living, but it's not greater than. I mean, if I'd been a historian, for example, then I would have done music as a hobby. But I'm a musician, so I read history as a hobby and study wine as a hobby and all these other things. But I could easily have done any of the other things. I could see my life as having been, say, a novelist. I could have done that, or I could have grown grapes. I could have done any of these things. Just happened to be music, I think.
Well, people do draw parallels nowadays between what you were doing, or have been doing for all these years, and a very popular band, the Decemberists, because they're in the folk mode, and they do, Colin Malloy does like historical-based songs. Has he ever contacted you or given you cred or anything like that?
No, but I've listened to their records. Obviously, they're great. It's a wonderful thing. I would... it made me very happy if someone would take over this job from me. I mean, I've been writing historical songs for 50 years and making a decent living out of it. And I often say, look, there are history teachers all over America who are scraping by, teaching kids that aren't interested, essentially. And if they would learn 3 chords on the guitar, they could have my job when I quit. But it's just extraordinary to me that no one has really taken up the cause of writing historical songs, apart from a handful. You say the Decemberists and, to some extent, Fairport Convention. There are a few.
Gordon Lightfoot did one big one.
I think the market would stand a lot more than, a handful.
Now, when you tour and when you play, are there songs in your catalog that you wish people knew as much as they do your more quote-unquote famous works? Are there a couple of songs that you're so proud of that you wish it was on everybody's iPod or iTunes?
Well, you can't decide that. I mean, it's an intangible. People like Year of the Cat. I mean, if I was sitting down and writing up my favorite say top 50 songs I've ever written, that one probably would come in around number 36, and for people who, I would think for the people who really follow what I do, I mean, there are some people that know every single word I've ever written. They even know demos that I didn't even release. But these people are not remotely interested in Year of the Cat. I mean, the record they like is probably past, present, and future. So the deeper you get into it, the more people get involved in the songs which I prefer. Year of the Cat is pretty much, it caters to the tourist trade. I mean, the people who might know, 2 songs by me will know Year of the Cat, and I understand that. But, the people who own all 20 of my albums are really not very interested in Year of the Cat, so it just depends how deep into the thing you are.
Well, yeah, the question was also, I mean, of those people who own all those other albums, are there 1 or 2 songs that you would put in your top 10?
Well, my top 10 fluctuates. It's what I'm not bored with, I mean, pretty much I usually say my favorite song is a song called Old Admirals, because it works on a number of different levels for me. It's based on the life of a British admiral called Sir John Fisher, who was the guy prior to World War I who brought the Dreadnought into being. And he was fired halfway through World War One. And so the line is, old admirals who feel the wind and never put to sea. And it's not really, as with pretty much all of my songs, it's not what it seems to be about. It's actually just about growing old and being unwanted. So I would put that very high in what I do, and as would probably the people who are deeply into what I do. But I also recognize that Year of the Cat had a kind of unrepeatable magic to it that made a lot of people happy. So I'm happy too.
And people don't realize, it was written, you weren't depressed, but it was about a very depressed guy. It was the comedian Tony Hancock who killed himself.
I tend to do something a little odd, which is that I write multiple sets of lyrics for my songs. And then, like at the end of the day, I say, do I want it to be about this or about that? And it was about Tony Hancock, and the American record label listened to it and said, well, we've never heard of Tony Hancock. Could you rewrite it? So I rewrote it into Year of the Cat. But I do this a lot. I mean, I'll write, if there are 4 verses in a song, I'll write 12, and then just pick the ones that appeal to me.
And you do generally start with the music first, and then
in fact, in the case of Year of the Cat, I recorded all the music first. I didn't have any words. We went in, we did all the backing tracks and all the overdubs, which meant I'd spent 95% of the money, and I hadn't written a single word. And I don't think anyone works like that. I like it. I like to wake up in the morning and put on like a backing track and just let my mind go completely blank and say, okay, what does this suggest to me? And then I can write a set of lyrics, and the next day I can wake up and write a different set of lyrics and keep, playing around with it until I've got it. But the record company in England, I thought I was completely mad because I'd spent all the money, and all I had was 45 minutes of instrumental music. There was no vocal on it. And they said, what are you doing? And I said, well, this is how I do it. I make backing tracks, and then I write lyrics to it. I went back a few months later, and I had all the words by then, and they said, oh, okay, all right, I guess you do it that way. But it's a tightrope walk, because if you happen to get writer's block, I mean, that's it. You're done. You've spent all the money, and and you've made an instrumental album. But
that's when
I've never had writer's blocks, and that's just how I did it at that time.
And then you just tell, Richard Thompson or Jimmy Page, okay, just solo. Do 3 minutes of solo. It's instrumental. We got it. Work with Ed Tide.
Well, you could do that, but I wouldn't recommend it, because I'm supposed to be a lyricist. I think I am a lyricist, and that's why I've never really worried about it. I just assume that it'll come, and if it doesn't, then you get up the next day and then it'll come.
Well, in terms of your personal life, you were married for a while and divorced about a decade ago. Where are you now in terms of?
Oh, now I'm actually having a great time. I have a long-time girlfriend. We've been going out for almost 10 years.
Mazel tov.
And it seems to be, it's actually one of the most successful relationships I've had. It's really good.
So are you going to leave it? Are you going to put a ring on it, or what?
What?
There's a phrase. Are you going to put a ring on it? In other words...
I don't know. I'm old. I mean, we're somewhat settled in our ways. I mean, I think we're perfectly happy,
Wonderful.
I got married once and it didn't work, so I'm not really the marrying kind, I don't think.
But, well, why do you think it didn't? Because it was just the music business was wine was taking too much of her focus, or you're just a different person now, or what?
I don't know. I mean, relationships are what they are. You enter them, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I mean, I can't figure it out. I mean, I've been in a fair number of relationships over the years, and not only that, but I mean, I look at my friends, and I'm sure you could do this too. You can play this game where you say, okay, which couples are going to stay together, and very often the ones that look like they're absolutely set for life are the ones that break up, and the ones that fight all the time, for example, stay together. I can't fathom it, so I've stopped trying to fathom it.
Oh, I've had couples break up when I was at
chuppah. I mean, if you can have a nice relationship and get close to someone, and it all works, then bully for you. I mean, it's great, But I don't know how it works, and I don't know why it works. But instead of taking the alarm clock apart and looking for how to put all the pieces back together again, I now just say, okay, it's an alarm clock, and as long as it goes off in the morning when you want it to, then that's all I need to know about it.
Well, last question for the absolutely delightful and incredibly talented Al Stewart. Yeah, you mentioned, of course, you you like to have a very eclectic life. You read and watch movies and read history, etc. But when you do choose to listen to other people's music, what have you been listening to recently? Any new artists or a mix of the new and the old? Who's on your listening device thingy?
Well, one thing, I don't know if everyone else does it, but what I like to do for new music is, I'll buy some of the English music press like Q or Mojo or something like that, and they always have a column with, they're recommending new bands, for example, and so you just go on YouTube and put in, whatever the name of the band is, and you can not only hear that, but it throws up a whole list of other people who are similar, so every now and then I'll check out all the new bands, and every now and then I'll hear one that will blow me away. I mean, I really liked Elbow for a while, for example. I love Joanna Newsom. She's a girl who plays the harp, and I've heard her described as the Emily Dickinson of her time. And she is an absolute A-plus lyric writer, probably in the same class, I would think, as, say, Leonard Cohen or Tom Waits or people of that nature. Her voice is a little difficult for some people to handle, as is the fact that she, plays the harp, so it's very unconventional, but the writing is absolutely magnificent. So there's an example of two, not exactly new people, they've been around for a while, but certainly newer. And I love to get out old records, I love to get out old Tabor Convention records like Legion Leap, because it's so brilliant. It's just amazing. The second band album is amazing. The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down is just one of those songs that I wish I'd written, but I didn't. They did. And on and on and on. I still pull out Leonard Cohen every now and then and play all the records, and I marvel at the lyric writing. I think the Stranger song by Leonard Cohen could be the best piece of lyric writing of the 20th century. And on and on and on, There's so much good stuff out there. But then there's the rock and roll side of me that, wants to play My Generation by The Who very loud, So I have pretty broad tastes. I mean, look, I even like the Ramones, there's no end to it. I think I like a lot of very different things.
Which is a wonderful way to listen and a wonderful way to be. And it has been a wonderful time shared here with Al Stewart. And remember, he will share 15 or so of his songs live Sunday evening, July 22nd at the YMCA Bolton Center. For more information and to get tickets and everything else, go to his website, alstewart.com, alstewart.com. Al Stewart, it just remains for me to say, what an incredible delight it has been sharing your memories, your stories, and sharing your music here in the neighborhood. I wish you continued health and great... As a matter of fact, what is the most recent song that you've written?
I just wrote a song about... there's a hotel, very famous hotel in Paris called the Ritz, and it became... it was a haven for artists. Ernest Hemingway basically was a fixture there before the Second World War. And then he was chased out by the Germans, obviously, and actually Goering turned it into his headquarters. And there were people like Coco Chanel hanging out there, and a lot of very famous people. Anyway, halfway through August, Hemingway discovers that the Germans are moving out. So he rounds up some French partisans, and with a gun in his hand, he goes to the Ritz and decided he's going to liberate it. But what he actually did was he liberated the wine cellar, and it said that they drank 150 bottles of champagne that night. So I'm about 3/4 of the way through writing a song called The Bar at the Hotel Ritz. So that would be my newest thing.
History and wine in the same song. How could you resist? Of course you're writing that number. Wonderful. Well, I hope the song turns out great, and I hope the rest of your long-to-be life turns out great as well. Al Stewart, a delight to have you in the neighborhood. Thank you so much, and shalom to you.
And to you too. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye now.